everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Harkins. Episode number 64. The guest is Zack Zarillo, the proprietor, owner, CEO, head honcho, big cheese of propertyofzack.com. You've heard me mention them a million times. Now get to know the dude behind the dude, so to speak. More on him in a minute. Now, this is the Property of Zack plug. Visit that site, propertyofzack.com. I won't talk about it much right now because we will talk about it a decent amount in the interview, but go visit there. Great news resource for you to find out about all the latest and greatest tours, releases, all that type of stuff. Visit there and enjoy it and make it part of your daily routine. Also, reviews. They have poured in over the past week or two, and if you haven't done one yet, I understand. There are many times where I am very lazy and shows that I fucking love, I just don't do because I either forget, I'm not in front of my computer or whatever. But if you wanted to take that 10 seconds to click on some stars in the iTunes store and or leave a review, I really do appreciate it. The one that was left recently by user AS is awesome because, I don't know, I can tell that they don't listen to podcasts on the regular. And so when they discovered this show, it kind of introduced them to this whole world of podcasts in general. So if I am your introduction to this medium, that's brilliant. And there's so much other fun stuff in store. And speaking of fun stuff in store, I'll be having a pretty cool announcement in the next week or two in regards to the show and some other really exciting things happening, which will hopefully bring some more people into this family that I like to call the show. Because it's weird because I definitely do feel this obligation to people that check out the show, and not in like obligation, like I have to show up to work sort of thing, but just that I'm making sure that I'm giving you the best shit possible and that you should be telling your friends about it because you are getting so excited about it, because I am excited about it. There you go. Anyways, thank you for the reviews. Keep them pouring in. I appreciate it. I'd also like to give a shout out to our editor, Tom Richfield, who is doing an amazing job. And I get to meet in like a few weeks. He's going to be traveling to the States. He is from the UK. And I'm excited about hanging out with him and lavishing him with gifts and records and whatever else I can give him for all of the hard work that he does in the show. So excited about that. And a few other things before we talk about Zack and the interview. I just saw, like as in last night, saw a documentary that I think everybody who is a fan of independent music in general, I think that's a safe thing to say. Go watch this. It's called A Band Called Death. It was released, I think, about last Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, on iTunes. Basically any digital provider in which you can download movies or music, this movie will be there. It's about $10 or so, completely worth it. I had the privilege of watching it on a movie screen and going to a theater for it because here in Los Angeles, or the greater Los Angeles area, we get a lot of cool shit. So I try to see it when I can. And the movie's incredible. Basically, it is documenting the story of 3 black males from Detroit, kind of predating punk and playing punk music without even knowing what that is or having a context for it, because they were kind of there first unintentionally and being completely overlooked for 30 plus years. And then now having a slight resurgence. But I'll let the movie speak to that more in depth because obviously I don't want to give away too much. But go see it. It's incredible. It's such a cool journey. And it just goes to show the power of music and how that can affect people's lives in ways that it just makes me sad when people just don't like music, where they're just like, oh, yeah, it's okay. And I'm like, I don't know, I feel like there's this like huge void in someone's life if they don't have, and I don't expect people to be like as nerdy as we all are about it, but just to have that sort of level of like, no, I go to, like a few concerts a year or whatever, and like they have that intimate connection where it's like music is an important part of their life. Go see that. A Band Called Death. And I was really proud of myself, and I know this is going to sound like a really stupid, inconsequential task that most people should be able to accomplish on their own. But me being the most non-handy person of all time, I've done this before, but I never in these circumstances of I changed the shit out of a flat tire I had. It was like super late at night. I was exhausted. I don't know what happened. Tire just exploded. I was able to pull off the freeway. My shit was smoking, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not good. Or I luckily was able to pull into a gas station, have a nice parking space. It's well lit, so I wasn't, on the side of the freeway fearing my life. And And I said, you know what? I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to do this shit on my own. I'm not calling AAA. I'm going to be a quote-unquote man. And I did it through the help of another gentleman who was working at the gas station. So he gave me a few pointers, like, oh, don't take off the lug nuts first. You should raise the car first. In case the car falls down, your rim will be completely blown apart, broken if the car randomly falls. Anyways, he just gave me a few pointers. Stuff that I'm like, oh yeah, that makes. But I did it on my own. And like I said, I shouldn't be patting myself in the back, but maybe I'm suffering from absolute exhaustion at this point when I'm recording. But I was proud of myself, and I felt like a man. And anytime you have those little things where it's just like, fuck yes, like I'm glad I accomplished that. Tires. I want to share that with you. And I'm sure a lot of you are just like, yo, you were a useless human being if you don't know how to replace a tire. But I'm not useless, so fuck you. Anyways, Zack Zarillo. I've only known Zack over email until recently. I met him for the first time at Skate and Surf Festival earlier in the year. Yeah, just a good dude. Like, I could easily tell that his heart is in the right place very quickly in the content that he puts out on the site. And he's a full-time student, and he doesn't do this as his career, even though, as you will hear in the interview, he wants to transition into that. I really wanted to capture the feeling of completely unintentionally doing something that starts to capture people's attention, as well as kind of the internet tabloid culture that sometimes pervades not only mainstream media, but obviously the media that we consume as well, from bands dissing each other on stage and people writing songs about other people and why they suck. And it's been happening for a while, but you just see it pop up and be more in your face, every few years. So I definitely think we're in the middle of a resurgence of that recently. Anyways, here's my interview with Zack. I will talk to you afterwards. Enjoy. Let's go. Don't wait. This night's almost over. Honest. Let's make this night last forever. Yeah, Zack's always there. I'll interview him at some point. I was like, you know what? Fuck this. Let's do this immediately. The most logical place for me that I always start these things off is basically my first exposure to what it is that you do, or as a person, I should say. I'm obviously older than you. And so watching...
Most people are.
Yes, most people are. Watching webzines come and go is always interesting, because usually you see within the first year loads of content come through a new site for, that's trying to establish themselves. And then it goes away because for whatever reason, either the person isn't passionate about it or real life gets in the way or whatever. But I remember looking at what you did, once you started to, push it out there a little bit more in, 2010-ish. That's when I recognized it. And I was like, in just looking at what you were putting out there, I was like, this seems sustainable. Like, you're not posting to the point where it's like, dude, shut the fuck up. This is annoying. You're posting, like, the band farts in the studio and you're posting a press release on it. When you started it, was that the original intention where you're like, all right, I don't want to seem like super duper fanboy, like here's everything that's ever happening in our scene? Or was it something that you just tried to figure a happy medium with that?
The website kind of didn't start on purpose. It's hard to explain whenever I'm asked. I never set out, like, if I was going to start a website or a blog or anything, it wouldn't have been called Property of Zack.
That was another question we'll hit on later, but yeah.
When the site started, when I obtained the domain name or whatever, I literally just wanted like a blog on Tumblr. And I wanted to like have a domain. I was 16, I guess, and I thought it would be really cool to have a domain name, or maybe I was 15 even. So then eventually it just started, and I was posting things that were interesting to myself and for my followers. Like if Blink-182 announced like a show, right? Because this would have been right after they like got back together. I'd be like, look, this is awesome. And so I think over time I just kind of learned what did and didn't work. I think we definitely do post more news than anyone, but it's rare that any of that news is kind of like bullshit. Like someone's going to find that valuable, and someone wouldn't have found it if I didn't post it. I think something that changed over time was when Twitter started becoming more popular, because when the site started, Twitter was certainly there, and it had been for a minute, but there would be every week it'd be like some big new band or singer joined Twitter that wasn't on Twitter before, and information wasn't really coming from Twitter like it does now. So much of my information comes from Twitter now. That's my favorite social network. We're on Tumblr, obviously, and that's the reason for Property Zack's success. But Twitter is my favorite. It's so great for so many reasons, and I think it's really changed so much for both consumers and the band.
And I definitely notice the speed in which you and the site reacts to obviously whatever news is coming out. And obviously some could say to a fault, where it's like, you're posting stuff before there's, whatever. We'll get into that later. But I do think that it is important the fact that you're reacting quickly, because it's like, you see other news outlets that, just post stuff, like you can totally tell that it's just whenever they feel like it's convenient, as opposed to actually pushing it out there because it's happening at this very moment.
Yeah. To me, I think there's two sides of the site that make it successful, and they work together. One side is our content. When we started, and still today, I think we have the best interviews because, back when the site started, there weren't really many Tumblr blogs or whatever you'd want to call them. There were just kind of websites that asked really shitty questions, whether it was like, what's your favorite color, or, whatever. And I would assume websites still do that. But so I was never interested in that, because at that point, no one looked at Property Zack. Everyone only looked at like Absolute Punk. So how was I going to get seen? How was the site going to get seen? And I realized, like, we have to ask questions where people don't know the answers. So, things that are exclusive content, whether it be touring stuff or studio stuff or anything. So I think that's the one side of the site. And the other is just our speed with news. It's rare that we're not first. And that absolutely bites our ass sometimes. But 9.5 out of 10 times, we're first and we're right. And we're first by a lot. That hurts other websites. Not only that they're second or third, but that readers know that if they want something breaking, it's probably going to be on Property Zack before website X.
You also have to look at it from the perspective where it's like, if you're quote unquote wrong, the ramifications of that are much less severe than like CNN.
Yes, yes, that's true. Oh man, when that happened, I was like, whew.
You always have to remind yourself where it's just like, okay, it's only fucking music. Even though it's goddamn important, it's only music.
Yeah, unless it's something truly terrible. Like, if I had named the wrong, like last night even, I don't mind saying this, with the whole As I Lay Dying thing, I saw it happen, and we were the first music website to post it by a good 5 minutes.
Sure.
But I originally tweeted out the wrong guy's name. So, tag someone who only had like 3 tweets, but something like that, like, that's like the worst it's going to get in our scene. It's not like someone like blew up something and I fucked up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, kind of moving back from this, we'll get into that talk a little bit more. You're obviously an East Coast kid. Where were you born?
I was born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Oh, wow. Tried and true New Yorker.
Yes. So I grew up in Manhattan, and I also grew up, which I count equally or more as my home. My family has a second house in West Milford, New Jersey, which is like Northwest Jersey.
Okay.
And
what exit?
It's not on the turnpike at all.
I know. I always like to make that joke, but
so it's 2 totally drastic, different environments. I grew up and I lived 5 days a week, every week in Manhattan. I went to a private school, like a Gossip Girl private school, an all-male private school, and I didn't fit in there at all, but I went there all my life. And so my other house in New Jersey is kind of what I consider real world, because Manhattan isn't real world at all, especially not for a kid.
Usually you don't hear of people that grow up, smack dab in that environment. Usually there's like a retreat. Like, obviously, like your parents had. What was your family structure? Like brothers and sisters, and what did your parents do for a living?
My parents were both married before they're married to each other. My father had a daughter, my half sister, before me. But my parents are very old. Not very old, but very old for how old I am.
Okay.
So I'm 20. My father is 71 and my mother is 61. So
that is old. That is old.
Yeah. So they had lives. They had pretty much full lives, like before they were married to each other and before they had me. Uh-huh. My mother is an independent businesswoman. She's had her own graphic design company and branding company for over 25 years now.
Oh, wow.
She's incredibly just inspired me in terms of business, and I definitely, I would assume that's where any of my money comes from. And my dad does promotional stuff. So in the same company, they work together. So some promotional stuff, meaning like merchandising. So like if you're a school and you need 10,000 X, he will get them for you.
Oh, okay.
So It kind of lucked out for me in terms of Property Zack because my mom's company did our logo and my dad does all our merch stuff.
That's incredible. It's
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
total mom and pop operation.
yeah. It really is. So yeah. I grew up in the city. I grew up in the '30s in like Midtown Manhattan, and in high school we moved to the Upper West Side. And now,
Did your sister, did your half sister live with you as well?
no, she was older as well. She was graduated out of college, I believe, by the time my parents were married. Even
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I never. I mean, my sister and I are we're not necessarily close, but we're not like unclose. She lives in Vermont and she's married.
Yeah. Well, she's doing different stuff than you
Yeah,
are.
yeah, and she's totally like her life in terms of like growing up was done before I was even born. So it's pretty much just me, my dad, my mom, and my mother's mom. My grandma lives with us too,
Oh, okay.
and she's the best.
Essentially, you felt, well, not you felt, but you were an only
I was
child.
no, I was absolutely an only child for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I could have almost guessed that because I definitely see, I have an only child as well. And I see, I just, there's something inherent, like where you can smell each other out. And
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, yeah. I think because, you know, you just become obsessed with stuff, whether it's like music or sports or whatever. I
Yeah,
just
you
think it's
kind
like,
of need something to grasp onto, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, I just yeah. So that's not entirely surprising. You lived in the city, but then obviously you spent the weekends kind of away from the sort of rat race.
Yeah, every weekend for sure growing up, and then any time where I could be extended longer, whether that was time during the summer or spring or winter break,
Mhm.
stuff like that, would spend all my
Got
time
it.
there.
Obviously, it sounds like your schooling experience was extremely. Like, when did you recognize that this wasn't what you were experiencing? Wasn't normal necessarily?
As me being an odd kid out in school, or as me growing up in Manhattan.
No, as I guess as you being sort of the odd kid out, and what made you the odd kid out?
And in a younger setting of me, like, kindergarten through, I guess, middle school, or, even beginning of high school, I was a heavy
Hmm.
set kid, so that didn't help. I would always, I'd get made fun of that pretty frequently, and I don't know. I just think it was, I think primarily how I was raised, and also having this retreat to New Jersey was that Upper East Side Manhattan kids are really rich and really obnoxious and
Hmm.
sometimes terrible. And while I don't think I'm the best person, I certainly was not a terrible person like that.
You're like on a sliding scale.
Yeah, on a sliding scale, you're real terrible. I'm only
Right,
semi
which
terrible.
is good. You can recognize that in yourself.
Yeah, so there were just these things. Like I certainly had friends. I wasn't an unpopular kid. I'd say I was a fairly popular kid, but in a different sort of way. I just couldn't subscribe to the sort of like just bullshit that would go around, and like I couldn't partake in it because I didn't understand it. I did play sports though growing up, so I did have like connections with teammates and stuff through that, but I was just never really fit in. And then a sort of when I was in middle school, I guess Blink-182 Newfound Glory were on the radio. Like that's when that stuff was
Hmm.
on the radio. And that's also the same time when I found music. We'll probably get into that later. But so after that, when I still loved all that stuff, and everyone else was like, hey, look at this 50 Cent album. And then like 3 years later it would be like, hey, look at this, whatever, something electronic
Sure.
album was. And I was like this loser who just listened to like Blink-182 and
You
sad
were,
emo music.
so you were this. I mean, your experience sounds similar to a lot of other people, where it's like, yeah, you were a slightly overweight kid listening to sensitive music, whereas everyone else was doing their own thing, and
Yeah.
music was just accompanying their life as opposed to
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely what it was. Music for me was everything. Whether it was because I'm an only child or because of like emotional issues or whatever. And music to everyone else was like, oh, look what 50 Cent says about this girl in this new
right.
song. And it just didn't matter. It was just something fun to them, or like a
Sure,
throwaway.
sure. It was disposable, whereas these things that you
I cherished. That was truly like my life. Like I didn't hate my school in terms of like actually being in school and like teachers and stuff, but kids I couldn't handle. Well,
Yeah, there's nothing you couldn't relate to any of them.
yeah. Well, some I didn't mind at all, and then some it's like truly dislike.
And it's funny too because you strike me as a person that obviously isn't afraid to share their opinions. Which
Yeah,
I'm sure that has come from that sort of place as well.
absolutely.
And so, what sports were you playing in high school?
I love, and I still do love soccer. I always, I don't know, I think I played soccer since I was 5 or 6 years old. I played goalie. I would say a pretty good goalie. I played some basketball too, but I was not great at basketball. But I love soccer. Soccer is probably my first love of anything. Every weekend, school teams, etc. And then in, I guess my freshman year of high school, I broke my wrist playing soccer. And had surgery and ended up having second surgery. And so I kind of stopped playing sports around then just because I couldn't do it.
And so then, as music started to envelop you, you like the actual experience of school, like you enjoyed learning and applied yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a phenomenal student. I got a lot better at this one point in high school. Like, I actually was never a great student. And then I had this one teacher in, I guess my sophomore year of high school, and she whipped my ass. And like, I don't even know if it was that, but like, she's actually a pretty good friend of mine now. She's a younger teacher, and she just kind of changed my perspective. Like, it wasn't like she loved what she did, but I could tell like that she was a real human too. Like, as if you're a kid, like, your teachers have lives,
Right.
but
it's hard because they're this position of authority, and yeah, it's weird to relate.
And so this teacher, Miss Amley, like, she was an authority in the sense that I would be terrified of my life if I did something to truly piss her off. But I wasn't like, I didn't follow the rules because she was my teacher. I followed the rules because like I respected her, and she had like a group of 2 or 3 kids that were important to her. And, we would just, instead of like going to study hall, we would just like go to her room and talk. And so at that point, sort of in junior years or sophomore year, between her and a girlfriend I had at the time, my grades got better,
Oh,
I guess.
you had motivation.
Yeah. I guess I never really had motivation before. And then suddenly, like, I liked history a lot suddenly.
And so then, as you started to progress through high school and everything, because like you said, you were just basically, were you online doing, blogging and that type of stuff? Or because you said, when you initially mentioned that you just obviously fell into Property of Zack, you said you had people paying attention to your writing. Like, what were you writing about?
I think it's weird. I can, like a butterfly effect, I can kind of pretty much know exactly how the whole timeline of like Property of Zack works, which I think is weird because a lot of people don't know that, like, in their own lives, like how things kind of unfold. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that in so many other areas of my life. But when it comes down to music, which leads to the site, like, I know exactly how everything unfolded, which is strange. But I used to always hang out on this like pop punk Blink-182 message board called Punk Disasters, which is now shut down. Okay. And that was also like a retreat for me because no one in my high school liked pop punk music or any kind of music that wasn't, rap or whatever, top 40 stuff. So I was always just on this message board pretty much all day and all night. And eventually that shut down. And so I just didn't have anywhere to talk about music. So that's why I started like my blog on Tumblr, just because I wanted to like keep talking about music, whether it was like with one person or no people. So I guess eventually Tumblr was really fresh back then. I think it was only around for a year or two. And I don't remember your question, but I guess eventually we just started having followers.
Yeah, you basically were just writing about music. So like you would get a new record and you would write about it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't write either. Like, like I'm not to this day. I don't believe I'm a good writer. I wrote reviews and stuff for the site in the early days because we didn't have anyone else to do it.
Sure.
And I think now I'm truly leaps and bounds better at writing than I was back then, and maybe now I'm all right. But then I was terrible. If you were to go back to like page, I don't know, 2000 on the website, you would see like those early blog posts, and it's not It's not like what Property of Zack is today, a year ago, or even like 3 years ago. It's just totally different, just like aimless and no point to it, because there wasn't a point to it originally.
There was no consideration of an audience. You were just doing it just as an outlet.
Yeah, it was fine. It was like if you went to Tumblr blog X, but I mean less so because Tumblr wasn't like a beast like it is today, and there's no like community or sense of like, oh my God, let me reblog you if you like Law Dispute 2 or something. It was just like this different kind of place back then.
Right.
And it was special too because it was such a small community at the time.
Sure. And so I'm going to presume that you are not pursuing a degree in journalism or anything like that. Are you, just because, like you said, you don't consider yourself a writer?
No, I don't consider myself a journalist.
Okay.
But I am pursuing a music industry degree.
Okay.
Which half the music, well, 3/4 of the music industry would consider a joke, and the other fourth doesn't care.
Right. It's true. Well, I imagine it,
myself included.
Right. Well, at least you're aware of that.
Yeah, I wanted to originally take a gap year before going to college. My mom wouldn't let me. I also don't want to go to college, but my mom is scary. It's basically the Jewish mother thing.
I see. So they're not to mention the Jewish mother, but then the Jewish guilt that comes along with it as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, she taught me everything I know.
So you really legit, like, did you have a legitimate conversation with her where you were like, okay, I'm graduating high school. Like, what was your pitch to her? How were you like, all right, I want to take a year off. This is why.
My pitch, like, if my pitch existed now, like, if the site is where it was now, then I could probably get a year off. Mm. But I wanted some time. The site was, at that point in my life, like, crazy. Like, it is today crazy, too. And, like, if I knew back then, it would have been like, no, that's not possible. But, you know, it was cool. It was working. I could tell it was going somewhere. Mm-hmm. At that point, there were very hush discussions of like, hey, maybe you could team up with Absolute Punk or something like that. And it was just fun. I was doing something for the first time in my life that I actually had passion for. I don't think many people in the world have passion for something. You know, like you can love music, but passion for something in terms of you know what you want to do with your life. Mm-hmm. Truly, like you can't be stopped. And for the first time with anything, I really did. And I wanted to just kind of attack that. And I thought, and I probably argued poorly, like I could make this so much bigger if I had a true year by itself, instead of trying to juggling it with college. Because, hey, look, I don't care about college. I'm telling you now.
Right.
All I care about is this website.
Interesting. So basically, all you're doing right now, this is an exercise in completing your familial obligations.
Yeah, that's what college is to me. I will totally admit that being in Philadelphia instead of New York City for these years has and will continue to be a huge source of growth for the website. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I don't want to be in college, but it's definitely helped. It hasn't hurt. It's weird. Everything in my life, I'm not going to say everything in my life has happened for a reason, right. But it's all, in terms of music stuff, like I was saying, like that butterfly effect, it's all work for the site's benefit.
Sure. I mean, it's cool because it's like, you know, like you mentioned, you're 20, and it's like I reflect upon myself when I was 20 and, you know, was playing in bands and was doing that whole thing. And I mean, obviously this was 12 years ago when I was 20, yeah. But the idea of being focused at something, and I think that's the one thing that always honestly inspires me and gets me really excited when people such as yourself, when they realize that when they are younger, that they can control some aspect of their destiny, where they're like, like, I don't need to wait for permission to do this. I don't need to wait for, you know, a graduation date. Like, I can just start doing this now.
Exactly. Yeah. And the first month of school was like last year, my freshman year, was truly like difficult for me. I was definitely like depressed, and I just didn't want to be there. I never enjoyed going to school in K through 12, even though I didn't like hate my school as an institution, just because of the people. When I came to Philly, to Drexel, I didn't hate anyone because I didn't know anyone, but it just like, who are these people? Like, you also don't know anything that I know, right? Or, you know, you're not connected in some like, and so that was tough. And it was also tough when I went back this year, just because it's more this year, because like the site has, you know, truly gone somewhere. But last year it was tough. And then I think somewhere in the middle or the end of last year was like, hey, like, I know I'm ahead of the game, one, because I'm young, and two, because I get to use the next 3 years of school as like my real job as well, but while I'm in school. And I don't know if that makes sense, but basically, like, my competition, I'm not too worried. I shouldn't say it that way, but anyone that has a website that's currently at the age 25, when I graduate from school, I'll be 22 and they'll be 28, and they're not, unless they're making true money, which good for them if they can, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. They'll eventually have to lay it to rest because they'll need to find like a real life job,
right?
Whether that's in the music industry or in whatever. But when I graduate, hopefully the Property Zack is big enough where it can actually be my real life job.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting because obviously you can look at this as your, your incubation period. Like all you're doing is honing the site's craft during this time because you don't have to pull any triggers on like, oh shit, there's those pressures that are coming. It's like you have the time to develop it. And then like you said, you'll hopefully transition right into it as a job.
Exactly. Like, yeah, that's exactly it. I am lucky enough where like I don't need to be worried about student debt and stuff because of my family. And, so my job is to not fail school,
right,
says my mom, and to, well, I've now made an agreement with my mom where I just need to pass.
That's good. That's a compromise.
Yeah, she understands.
Like now, because I in a lot of the conversations that I have on this podcast, there's definitely the whole trying to explain to parents what exactly it is that you're doing. Where it's just like, what? Like when you first started to go to shows and stuff like that, I'm sure your parents had no context on.
I never. How old were you when you went to your first show?
The first time that I know that I drove myself to a show, maybe about a month before my 16th birthday.
Maybe I was about to turn 15. Mm-hmm. I think that's, and so like I never could go to a show before that because I didn't know I was allowed to. And honestly, my first show I was pretty much not allowed to go, but it was an Angels and Airwaves show. My parents like understood that like Blink-182 and like Angels and Airwaves were like all I had in the world. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like a true show. It was to like 3,500 people and, like that. So my parents definitely didn't understand my music and my attitude and my desire to like go be in these scary places where kids throw themselves around.
Right. And especially too, because obviously, like you mentioned earlier, your parents are much older than your typical parents. So like you have kind of two barriers. You have the whole...
Yeah. My dad is definitely much more old fashioned.
Sure.
Not so much my mom.
Okay.
Sometimes my dad is definitely kind of like the strict guy. And my mom is kind of like, I'll work on him.
That's cool.
Yeah. But my parents now, I'd say my mom was always fascinated when Property Zack was like a real baby. She was fascinated. My dad didn't get it, but she was fascinated, and she obviously helped with the logo and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the only reason I got into the school I got into was because of Property Zack. I obviously go to a music industry program, but my grades weren't fantastic, but I definitely got in because of the site.
Right.
I think by the end of my senior year, my mom was like truly on board, like, hell yeah. And my dad thought it was cool, but he didn't necessarily understand it either. Mm-hmm. Now he totally does. And they're both like, the website is truly as successful as it is in a large part because of my parents. Not only in the way that like my mom raised me and growing up in a business oriented, like self-made world, but just all the help. Like there's never been a point where they've been like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. My dad more wants me to get like an A in school, but they get it. They're great. They totally get that this is something real and actually tangible and different and just different, and they're great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like an interesting environment just based on the fact, like you illustrated, where your parents were both kind of, hustlers in the sense of they were, they were handling their own business and they were doing a lot of their own things as opposed to, working for a company that, gets them. I mean, obviously they're working for a company that they've established themselves, but yeah, so it kind of, your DNA, you're hardwired to sort of build it yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
And I want to hit on a few topics when I was your age, and I feel so weird anytime I say that. When I was your age, it's like, what the fuck am I talking about? Like, I did a lot of freelance writing, and that was when, I mean, there still is a zine culture, but zines were much more prevalent.
Right.
Whereas they actually had, they would do runs of anywhere between 5,000 to 20,000 copies and whatever. So it was interesting.
That's crazy.
I know, it is. It's funny. I mean, there's all these zines like Law of Inertia out of New York, Status Fanzine out of here in California. And these were all like more miniaturized versions of what alternative press or Decibel is today.
Yeah.
It was I was just always interested, like you, in sort of writing and expressing yourself within the confines of music. But anyways, long story short, where it's just like I started, kind of getting to know these people and started writing for them, and it was interesting because they, almost immediately within like 5 or 6 months of me quote unquote working for them, they started to pay me. That culture has definitely changed, especially just because the web is what it is. And so, like, do you yourself, do you have an opinion on regards to the idea that, people, if they want to get involved, like, they just need to know that they're going to have to do it for free for fucking ever before anyone will ever be able to pay them?
It'd be hard for me to argue that that's wrong because I never grew up in an environment where that actually was wrong. I mean, I think it's definitely tough. I think age matters so much with it because if you're 16 and you hone your craft and you're a pretty decent writer by the time you're 18, then you can totally do it for free through your college years, and unfortunately you're not going to get paid, but maybe that's going to get you somewhere by the time you do graduate. But if you're anything older than that, like if you're at the end of your college life or you're graduated, it's so much tougher to be able to be like, yeah, I think I like writing. I'm passionate about it. Like, I'll give this site 3 reviews a month for free. I don't know. I think that's an interesting. Everyone on Property is volunteer, and no one gets paid.
And I also really like how you put that, because I think honestly you're one of the few sites that actually makes that known in the sense of like volunteer, because I think everyone else, it's like, oh yeah, they're a staff writer, but if you use that in the real world, that totally means that you're getting paid for it.
Yeah, and everyone's a volunteer. I'm the only person that posts news, so that part of the site would never change. But if we lost all of our volunteers, the site would be a drastically different place. And so I'm really thankful, and obviously a lot of these people are glad to do it out of their own time. Most of our team members are in the college years, I guess, or right after. But we do have 3 or 4 people who are in their early 30s who just love music. And they have real jobs. They're not like unemployed or anything. They have real jobs.
Right. They're part of society.
They're part of society. They contribute to society. I assume they pay taxes. But they love music, and they're talented, and they want to be somewhere, and they want to do anything to still have their work published in any way, and are glad to. And that's been fantastic to me, because our oldest writer and probably our first volunteer hire, the website sort of started with just me, and then Emily, who was our number 2 for about 2.5 or 3 years, was always with us. And then Jesse Richmond was, I think, our first writer that was not Emily or I. And he's in his 30s, and he has a real job, but he's always been a phenomenal contributor. And I think it was sort of with him that I realized, like, oh, I could actually count on other people, and there are actually really great people that would want to volunteer their time. And that's always been special to me, and it's great. I've seen other people get hired. So I do think, even if you're not being paid, which sucks because it would be nice to be paid,
Yeah.
But it can lead somewhere.
Right.
I've seen it lead somewhere.
Of course. You have to look at it from the big picture. If you're going to amass all of these really solid written pieces on whatever, that's going to look interesting to your prospective next freelance job or whatever. I mean, it's like, yeah, you see the freelance writers that are around today, and it's like they're writing for 6 or 7 different sites, as opposed to 2 or 4 years ago where they were writing for like 3. So it's just a changing landscape.
I never saw, I guess, much of that world. I see those arguments now when it's people getting pissy about not being paid or whatever. And it's like, to me, I'm thankful that I don't have that attitude, just because I didn't live, I wasn't like who I am in that era.
Right.
And I totally understand it, for sure. I'm lucky that wasn't when I was around.
Yeah. I also look at it from this perspective too, where it's not like if you're paying somebody to write, that their writing is necessarily going to be better because they're getting paid, if that makes sense.
Exactly. We have some fantastic writers. And we have people who have gotten so much better just because they care enough. Because whether they want to do it as a job in some way, or just because they care about writing, and it shows. I don't think just because I pay you doesn't mean you're giving me better stuff.
Right.
For sure.
It could be motivational, but that is kind of where it lands, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And kind of what, something that we were talking about earlier in regards to the whole idea of, I'm sure the most prominent articles and news pieces that you publish are all obviously usually sensationalistic in content, and not like you're not pitching it as such, but you are presenting the quote unquote facts. Is it one of those things, like, because to me, you read a news article or whatever is happening within the scene, it's frustrating to be like, oh wow, well, this is basically, we're just a microcosm of society, in the sense of, like, you look at Us Weekly and it's like, it's a massive publication, and the whole tabloid culture bleeds into what this music scene is as well. I'm sure you've noticed it, and I'm sure you have thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't know. Some people call like Property Zack like baby TMZ, and that really, like, I'm not. Property Zack doesn't comment on when Sherry Dupree gets pregnant, or when whoever has a baby or gets married. We've never made a post like that, and we never will. We don't like comment on when Alex Gaskarth gets his haircut.
Right.
Some websites do. We are totally a microcosm, though, and it becomes more obvious as more fucked up stuff happens. This As I Lay Dying thing, or Of Mice and Men, or like it's really funny. I mean, it's not funny that stuff happens, but it is kind of clear that we are just like a baby solar system, and unfortunately only 2 million people are in that solar system compared to the 200 million people that buy Us Weekly.
Right.
I don't know what your question necessarily was, but
I didn't have a specific question. It was just more pointing you in the direction of, if that's something that you obviously personally have noticed yourself, if it sits with you okay, or if you're just like, well,
like, I'm fine that you can call Property Zack a tabloid site. Like, I don't care about that. If you think it is, then I think you're like misconceived. If we were a tabloid site or TMZ, we wouldn't be pushing into this new editorial kind of direction that we're going with real stories, and we wouldn't have this really good video work. We wouldn't care about being a voice for bands as well, rather than just like, Haley Williams' hair looks bad today.
Right. Gossip fodder.
Yeah, I don't think we gossip either. We definitely post some rumors here and there, but to me, that's not gossip. To me, that's not necessarily tabloid either. Kids look for that stuff, and I look for that stuff. Whenever it comes down to a feature on the website, it's what I want. It's what I would want to read. When Property Zack was starting, once I realized it was actually a thing, not just some domain name. So anything that's on the site, besides necessarily the bands, because I don't listen to a good portion of the bands on the website, but I don't know. I don't necessarily believe we're tabloid. I get that people say it, but
sure.
If you're an artist and you're pissed off because you tweeted that you're in the studio and I posted about it, but you're pissed off at me because I didn't wait until I got a press release about it, then I don't, and you're calling me a tabloid, I think you misunderstand how the internet works. You shouldn't be tweeting something to your potentially, let's say, 20,000 followers if you don't want that to be heard, and if you don't want anyone to talk about it. I think there's a lot of artists who are cool with it, a lot of artists who just don't really care. And then there's this weird in between of some people who want things both way, to be able to talk about, I'm writing new songs for this band, or hey, I'm in a new project, and I'm not going to tell you what the other band member's in, but I'm going to tell you the initials of their name. And if I can't guess the initials of their name and put it on my website, you shouldn't have teased it.
Sure.
Because that's my job. I have a job at the end of the day.
Right. That totally makes sense. I see exactly where you're coming from, and I agree with you, and that's obviously why we are partners in what we do, because Property Zack isn't just covering the band member farts in the studio.
Yeah.
And to being the fact that, obviously you're young yourself, and have been, involved with this music for, a fourth of your life. The common complaint, and like, I don't necessarily agree with this, but just like, the whole old guy statement of like, okay, the young kids don't know what's happening these days. They don't look backwards. They don't have a historical perspective on what came before them. Like I said, I don't necessarily agree with that. I agree they may not go back. Like when I say they, like the kids may not go back to the degree of which the old people want them to. But I feel like they're like, especially with the fact, like obviously like the decade feature that you guys are doing, where it's like, you celebrate records that obviously have existed for 10 years.
And I was 10.
Right. Is it one of those things that you notice as just being a misconception of young people, or being like, you do see that young kids just don't know anything and they're just trying to figure it out?
In terms of a fan, or in terms of like the people who do jobs like me?
In terms of a fan and like the readers of your site. Yeah, more so as a larger picture than you specifically.
Me specifically, though, I never, the way I found a lot of the music that I love is interesting. I started like taking guitar lessons, I think when I was 10, maybe I was 11. I think I was in like sixth grade or something. And a few years before that, like my best friend, who's 3 years older than me, like the first time I ever experienced like punk or pop punk, any kind of subgenre of it, was like my best friend played me like played me a Sum 41 song, and I didn't know what it was. But I was like, oh my god, what is this? And I was like 9. And so eventually, like when I started being like aware of music, I would go to like my guitar lesson every Saturday, and he was like a punk guy. And he would be like, do you know this band? Like, here, this band's called the Get Up Kids. And so a lot of the music I love is like late 90s emo or early 2000s pop punk or emo. And so that's kind of what I grew up on. When Brand New or Taking Back Sunday were getting off the ground, I was 10. That's way too young,
you know? Yeah.
So when I was 14, I guess that's kind of when I found all that. But that's all I cared about then, because I was like in a mind warp. Like I didn't care about anything else. I stuck my head in the ground. I listened to like Blink-182, Taking Back Sunday, Brand New, and bands in that era of like, 1998 to 2005. There was nothing like anything after that, like I wasn't really aware of for a little while at least. But I think now if you're like, I don't know, 16 years old and you love the Wonder Years and the Wonder Years are your favorite band, you might love like Brand New, Taking Back Sunday, and Blink-182, but I think you may not know what the Get Up Kids are. But so when it comes down to like older people being like, these young kids, like get off my lawn, I think it depends. There's definitely like a lot of history that you don't know. Like I don't know a ton about, I guess that's not true, but a lot of kids my age don't necessarily know a ton about like Lifetime,
sure,
or a ton about the Bouncing Souls.
Mm-hmm.
I do because of some of the people I grew up knowing, like some people I met, and like so I know what like J Tree Records is, and I know what other labels like that are in those bands. But I definitely know just from people that I go to school with who like this kind of music that there's just sort of people don't know a lot of that stuff, and that stuff does get put into the history of newer bands that a lot of kids do like. So I don't know, when it comes to general music listening and like going to shows and like you don't know what a house show is and that kind of stuff, I don't know, I think it's just tough. It's sort of the same issue of like, am I a tabloid magazine or is this like how it is now?
Right.
There's no real answer. It's just kind of,
I definitely think it's like people have different starting points, and sometimes their starting point is that's it, and they're not going to go backwards. As long as they stay involved in music, that's all you can really ask.
Yeah, as long as that, yeah, that's like as long as you're involved in like contributing. Like if you buy a record, like if you don't download every record you like for free illegally, but like you're downloading music that and you're buying for it, like who cares if you don't know what the Get Up Kids are if you only know what Man Overboard and the Wonder Years are? It's I think it totally is a experience of how you grow up, and I'm sure like someone your age doesn't know bands that inspired the bands that they grew up loving. That's kind of like always how it is. It doesn't matter. Someone your age, if they're bashing someone that's like 16 for not like knowing how it worked or the bands that came before, I bet that same person might have not known 10 bands that were highly influential to the bands you grew up loving in like the mid 90s.
For sure.
It's such a technology. Oh, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers, we didn't have tablets.
Yeah.
Like there will be something in 10 years that one of us are not going to know how to do too well.
Right, exactly.
It's totally just you grew up in a different era, but I bet that problem was just as persistent in a different way when you grew up.
You need to learn and adapt, otherwise you just become outdated yourself, and then in turn you become bitter, and that's just sad.
Yeah, so many people are jaded. I think it's clear, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you look at it, who's jaded a lot more now just because of like Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, just to look at how curmudgeon-y they are.
Yeah. It's like, you don't need to be complaining about everything.
Yeah, no, for sure. And sort of to wrap things up in a somewhat cohesive manner, normally I don't really talk about the quote-unquote future that much with people, usually just because they're either like in the middle of it or, you can already see where they're going. But obviously, since you have such a interesting perspective, like your incubation period, so to speak, your ultimate goal is to basically be like, okay, I'm turning this into my job, and I would like to hire, one or two people, and I would like to make this a thing. Like, what if you could make your site into your ideal model? Like, if there's some other site that doesn't cover music or whatever that exists out there, and you could model it after that, what sort of path do you want to take this on?
If I could be any website in the world, I would be The Verge.
Okay.
That's a tech site.
It's a great site.
That's definitely my favorite site. But see, Property Zack is not a website. Property Zack is a blog.
Yep.
So a lot of times, like when I'm talking to people, they're like, "I think you need to be a lot more like this," and I'm like, "Well, that's not a blog." And they're like, "Well, so what?" I'm like, "No, you don't understand. We're a blog. The reason why I can post things in 20 seconds and it takes you 10 minutes is because of what I have at my fingertips, which is a good, quick service." So Property Zack is a blog, but I don't know. We're kind of like a blog plus in the sense that we have a lot of features and those features grow, and I need to streamline them a little better. So if I could have a dream of what Property Zack is in 5 years, let's say, that's that it, one, still exists, that I am making a living off of it, that our owners don't close us down, that hopefully I can hire some people too. But I don't know, that's kind of tough too. I definitely want to be doing Property Zack forever, or as long as I can. I have a contract that ends the year after I graduate, so I sort of get my gap year that I wanted the year after I graduate.
Sure.
To just sit at home. I mean, it's basically what I do now, just without the hassle of school. And so I hope by that time that Property Zack is big enough to where it's actually truly sustainable, which I think it is. I didn't know for a long time, but I think if things go how they're going, that it will be. So I don't know. Property is actually my passion, my number one passion, and it will continue to be. But I definitely like exploring other things, which I'm doing now with managing a band, and I just started a record label, which technically doesn't exist to the world yet, but soon will.
Sure.
But soon will this summer. And I think what's good about Property Zack that a lot of websites don't have is that the connections we have. Like, there are definitely people who don't like the site or don't like me because we're a gossip TMZ website. But then again, there are a lot of people like me being friends with you and having you on this feature on the site every week is something that no other websites really have that. But we have that with a lot of people.
Right.
Not to like insult anyone. I'm a well-rounded person in the quote-unquote music industry because I'm truly like friends. A booking agent books a lot of the bands we know is a block away from me, and he goes to Penn, which is a neighbor of Drexel.